Maybe Penny is trying to get in. Can you email her the link? Okay, folks, that is 6 o'clock. We have 5 members of council of the committee present. There are one other trying to get in right now, but we'll call this to order. I'll ask the members of the committee to come on screen. And we'll say, welcome to the Committee of Adjustment for this January the 4th. It is now 6 p.m. The meeting is being streamed live, and we will welcome any attendees, anyone who wishes to speak to any of the issues brought before us today. Okay. So we'll start with the adoption of the agenda. I am intentionally going slow as we have one more committee member trying to join in, but technology is thwarting. Okay. Welcome, Ms. Parks. Okay. So we have the agenda before us. Are there any known errors or omissions or any edits to the agenda? Seeing none, right, I'll ask for the approval of the agenda. Okay. Ms. Parks, seconded by Mr. Townend. Right. Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof? Mr. Hagedorn?
I'm going to be declaring on item 5.1, 138 Mud Lake Road, as I'm an adjacent property owner.
5.1, thank you very much. Anyone else? Seeing none, we move to the approval of the Committee of Adjustment minutes. And the first one is from November the 2nd. We have the minutes before us. And are there any known errors or omissions to those minutes? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve? We'll go with Mr. Buderick and Mr. Hagedorn. Okay. Any comments? Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Sorry, Ms. Parks, was that opposed? No. Okay.
No, sorry. I'm just trying to get the lighter background.
That's okay. With that, we'll call that carried. And next up is the Committee of Adjustment special meeting from November the 24th. All right. Again, are there any known errors or omissions? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve those? Mr. Townend, seconded by Mr. Gordon. Thank you. All right. Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. And we move to the public meeting. First up, and Mr. Hagedorn has noted his conflict on this one. 138 Mud Lake Road from Gordon and Mary Ellen Fenwick. Mr. Voss, you have a presentation for us?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. My name is Peter Voss. I'm the planning technician with Loyalist Township, and I'll be presenting tonight's reports. The first report is item 5.1. The purpose of this discussion is to recommend approval of the consent to sever application D10-008-2020 for the purposes of creating a new building lot taken from the lands located at 138 Mud Lake Road. The applicants, Gordon and Mary Ellen Fenwick, are requesting consent to sever a 2-acre parcel of land, leaving a remnant parcel of approximately 146 acres. The property is approximately 148 acres in total size with 480 meters of road frontage on the Mud Lake Road. There is a pipeline that runs diagonally through the property, but it is sufficiently distant to the proposed development areas located at the northern part of the lands. The land is primarily used for agricultural purposes, but has a house, a detached garage, a barn, and other agriculturally related buildings. There is a watercourse on the east side of the lot that runs under Mud Lake Road, and portions of the retained lot also contain contributory woodland. Surrounding land uses are farmland and residential. Staff have reviewed the application. Looking at the Planning Act requirements, we have to look in whether or not it's in the public interest or conforms to the official plan, and the suitability of the land for the purposes for which it's being subdivided, as well as the dimensions and shapes of the proposed lots. The proposal appears to promote efficient land use patterns while maintaining the rural character of the area. The resulting lots are an appropriate shape and size, which we'll discuss later in the discussion. There are no cultural heritage values or hazard lands identified on the property, so staff are of the opinion that the proposal represents an efficient use of land and meets the Planning Act considerations. In terms of the provincial policy statement items that we reviewed, we looked at whether we need to avoid development patterns and inappropriate land use patterns. We also look at whether the proposal conforms with permitted uses and intent in rural areas, whether the proposal is in conflict with the PPS policies, and whether the proposal can be sustained by rural service standards. Staff feel that the proposal meets the provincial policy statement considerations. In terms of the official plan considerations that we reviewed, we looked at both the county and the township official plans. Both plans designate the lands as rural area, and the proposal does not appear to have any conflicts with the county official plan. Key township official plans considerations, we have to make sure that the consent policies are met. So the severances in this case, only 2 severances are allowed to be on any lot as the lot existed since 1986. So in this case, they had room for 1 more severance on the property. We need to ensure that the size of the lots are appropriate, and the retained lot being has to have a retained minimum of 10 hectares with 150 meters of road frontage. The proposal meets those requirements. We need to make sure that it doesn't promote strip development, and development does not hinder rear yard use. Again, the size and shape of the properties allow for the rear yards to be accessed, so we feel that it's in keeping. We also need to make sure that there's direct road access. In this case, the road authority is the county of Lennox and Addington, and they have no objections to the proposal. We ensure that we also have to ensure that the proposed uses are permitted, and in this case, the agricultural and residential uses are recognized. The most important factor that we had to look at was the MDS setbacks to any conflicting land uses, in this case between any barns and the actual severed property. So staff conducted the minimum distance calculations for the barn on the subject property as well as the neighboring barn to the east. While there are no conflicts found with the neighbor's barn to the east, the minimum distance separation calculation for the barn on the subject property, Sorry, I had a mistake in my notes here. It's there were no conflicts with the NBS noted on these parcels. Okay. So zoning considerations, we looked at it, and the size and positioning of the lots meets the zoning provisions. The property is zoned rural, and as discussed, the NDS calculations, which are part of the zoning provisions, was already reviewed and found acceptable. So therefore, we feel that it meets the intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw. So staff only received 1 inquiry from the public member, and concerns were addressed, and no other comments have been received by members of the public. So in this case, we're asking for a recommendation of this application with the standard conditions for legal registration, creation of a survey, parkland and lieu fee, establishment of suitable well, and that the applicant will obtain an entrance permit from the county, as well as enter into a development agreement to require a grading plan to be registered on title. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Voss. Committee, do we have any questions with regard to this report? I do note that Penny Porter has joined us as well. Welcome, Ms. Porter. And is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak to this, either the applicant or any interested parties? I'm seeing none at this time. Okay. I'll go back to the committee. Okay. If you have no further questions, do I have a motion? The recommendation here is to approve subject to conditions. Do I have a motion?
I'll move to receive and adopt. I'm sorry, I'm just going to be joining with audio.
And understood. Just make sure you speak up so I catch you. And so moved by Ms. Porter, seconded by Mr. Buderick. Okay. Ms. Porter, any comments?
No,
And Mr. Buderick? Anyone else? And then I'll call the question. All those in favor? Ms.
Yay.
Porter? Thank you.
Yay.
And motion is carried. And we move now to item number 5.2, 6213 County Road 2, severance application by Mr. Dick. Mr. Voss, you have a report?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have actually two reports in this instance. I'm hoping that the committee will allow me to speak to both of them. This is for items 5.2 and 5.3 on the agenda. That's for John Samuel Dick's severance application, as well as minor variance application that pertains to the same lot.
Please go ahead.
So the purpose of these reports is to outline the consent to sever application D10-009-2020. That is a severance being requested for the property at 6213 County Road 2. In order to accommodate that severance, the applicant also needs to obtain a minor variance to reduce the road frontage requirement according to the zoning bylaw and also the official plan. So that is the for minor variance application D13-017-2020. The applicant is requesting consent to sever an approximate 2.67 acre parcel of land and will leave a 25.2 acre parcel of land as a remnant. The purpose of the severance is to create a new residential building lot. The applicant has a concurrent minor variance application for the retained lot. Approval of this severance is contingent on the approval of that and the registration of that minor variance. Worth noting is that on the application's sketch, there is an old farm pond that was highlighted. This was of concern for the property, just to make sure that it didn't straddle the lines between the two sides, because the CRCA had concerns as well as township staff in terms of drainage and potential future impacts between neighbors. For that reason, there will be a requirement to fill the pond so it doesn't straddle both the severed and the retained parcels. That we'll discuss a little bit further. The subject property is generally rectangular, approximately 27 acres in size with 198 meters of road frontage. The environmental protection zone of the property actually follows the water course that runs across the midway of the property, but it is primarily farmed land, or at least at one time was farmed. There is sufficient land south of the water course to allow for development to occur without impacting the water course, as was confirmed with the Conservation Authority. The subject property was also used for agricultural purposes and is currently being used for residential purposes, having an existing house and an old unoccupied livestock barn. Staff reviewed the severance as it pertains to the various policies. We looked at the Planning Act policies, again, determining whether the proposal is in the public interest, conforms to the official plan, its suitability of the land for the purposes for which it's being divided, as well as the dimensions and shapes of the proposed lots are to make sure that they're satisfactory. The proposal appears to maintain the rural character of the area, and resulting lots are considered to be an appropriate shape and size, even with the reduced frontage of the proposed retained lot. There are no identified natural heritage features in the proximity of the proposed severed lands. Staff are of the opinion that the proposal represents an efficient use of the available land resource, and therefore the proposal meets the Planning Act considerations. Looking at the provincial policy statement, We need to avoid development and inappropriate land use patterns. We have to consider whether the proposal conforms with the permitted uses and intent of the rural areas, and whether the proposal is in conflict with other PPS policies, and whether the proposal can be sustained by rural service levels. To ensure that there were no conflicts between neighboring activities, we had to look at the various barns in the area, and we had to conduct a minimum distance separation calculation. And that was both for the barn on the subject property itself, and there was another barn to the east. And what this does is creates a new buffer so that we know where the areas are where we cannot allow human habitation or residential build on the properties themselves. So the result was that the neighbor's barn was found not to conflict with the severed parcel. However, the subject property barn did encroach, in other words, the owner's barn did encroach into the severed parcel, thereby reducing the potential building envelope of that severed parcel. Further analysis determined that the building envelope was sufficient in the end, and on the severed parcel, which exceeded the 0.5 hectare minimum according to the MDS guidelines. For these reasons, staff have included a recommended condition in this report to depict the 127 meter buffer on a drainage plan, representing a no development zone for human habitation that will be required at the time the building permit is submitted for the severed parcel as part of the development agreement that will be placed on title. The proposal does not conflict with any of the other PPS policies and is considered an efficient use of land. The severance will not detract from existing uses nor nearby agricultural activities and serves to promote the vitality of the area. The resulting lots are satisfactory in shape and size, serving to maintain the rural character of the area and provide sufficient space for existing residential agriculture uses on the retained land. It's staff opinion that the proposal meets the PPS requirements. Looking at the official plan considerations, we looked at again at the county official plan and the township official plan. The county official plan designates the lands as rural area, and the township official plan designates the subject properties as lands as rural and environmentally sensitive. The proposed residential uses are recognized in both of the official plans, and the county official plan doesn't have defers to the local official plan for rural lot creation. So the area and shape of the severed and retained lots has been selected to preserve these environmentally sensitive buffers around the watercourse on the property, which the CRCA, the Conservation Authority, has confirmed to be a suitable distance away from the proposed development areas. As mentioned, the old man-made farm pond that straddles the proposed east boundary of the severed lot extends also into the retained lot. The township and CRC agree that this is not recommended. For that reason, the application highlights an old farm pond that will be required to be filled. CRCA staff conducted a site visit, determined if the pond on site would be considered a regulated feature as a water body. It's found that the pond is not physically connected to any surface water course and therefore not regulated, and no CRCA permit would be required. They did recommend that the applicant seek some information on best practices from Ministry of Environment and Conservation of Parks. They responded positively and said that there was no authorization required from them. So the township staff then concluded that the pond could be filled using a township fill permit that will be added as a condition on the approved severance. The official plan dictates that the retained lands should have a minimum road frontage of 150 meters. The applicant has therefore requested a concurrent minor variance with this application, D13-017-2020, to reduce the retained land road frontage from 150 meters to 137 meters in order to address this requirement. Staff feel that this reduction will still allow for access to the back of the parcel and allow for other recognized uses, including former farming practices, to continue. The reduction is in keeping with other similar requests in the township and is not readily visible from the road. and is not viewed to impact the streetscape and rural nature of the area. The county is the road authority in this case and has no objections to the proposal, and will specify a location for a new entrance in their entrance permits requirements. In looking at the zoning considerations, the zoning bylaw also enforces the MDS calculations, which we already addressed. As such, the buffer that goes into the Severance areas will have to be placed on as a condition to highlight the areas that where no builds can happen. So we feel that with the exception of the road frontage, that otherwise meets the intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw. Staff received a letter from the neighbor across the street stating no objection to the proposal. That wasn't included in the package. We just received that today. No other comments have been received by members of the public. Therefore, staff are recommending approval of both applications to this with the standard conditions for legal registration, creation of a survey, parkland and lieu fee, and establishment of a suitable well on the severed portions, as well as the following conditions, which are a little bit outside the norm. The reference plan is to include the existing pond limits that straddle both the severed and retained lands, and that's so that it can be referred to by future owners or the current owner for the purposes of a build later on down the line, because there are restrictions that are going to be held for compaction testing on the areas of the pond if any development were to occur there. So in order to address this, the applicant also has to have a development agreement placed on title, both for the typical grading plan that we asked for, but also to show the grades of the former pond area. The development agreement also has to address that residential buildings on the severed parcel are prohibited within the required minimum distance separation of 127 meters of the building indicated as barn on the attached sketch. The development agreement also, as another condition, has to include a clause on both the severed and retained parcels that will require the proponent to provide geotechnical compaction records by a certified geotechnical firm upon completion of the pond filling if development is to occur. So this is just if a future developer is going to build something on the pond area itself. So both minor variance and the application are dependent upon each other and have clauses, conditions in the reports that state one is dependent upon the other. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Committee, do we have any questions with regard to this report? None? I go to the audience, and is the applicant present and wishes to make comment, or is anyone else wishing to make comment with regard to this report? Mr. Dick.
Hello there.
Welcome. We can hear you. Please go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm new to this. I'm not sure if I'm to say anything, or I just kind of was present, just watching the meeting.
And it's perfectly acceptable. If you have a statement you wish to make in support of the application, you can do so, or you can simply be available for questions if any of the committee members have questions with regard to your application. That's up to you.
Yeah, I'll just stay present, and if you have any questions, I'm here.
Okay. Committee, do we have any questions for Mr. Dick? Doesn't look like it at this point.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. I will see, is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak with regard to this application? I'm not seeing anyone, any hands. Okay. So I'll come back to the committee. Committee, we have a recommendation to approve with, I believe, 11 conditions. Okay. If there are no further questions, I'll look for a motion for that recommendation. And I'll go with Mr. Townend, seconded by Mr. Hagedorn. Any comments? None from either. Any other members of council, the committee, wish to make comment? Seeing none, I will call for the votes separately. So we'll start with item 5.2, the severance application. Right. I consider the motion to approve those. Yes, thank you. So I'll call the question first on 5.2, the severance application. All those in favor?
Yay.
We heard you, Ms. Porter. Thank you. Any opposed? And that motion is carried. And we'll move on to 5.3, the minor variance application. Right. Do I have a mover for that? And Mr. Buderick, seconded by Mr. Townend. Thank you. And again, any comments? And I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? I heard your yay, Ms. Porter. Thank you. None opposed. The motion is carried. So both 5.2 and 5.3 are approved. Moving forward, we move to item 5.4, 3710 South Shore Road, Mr. Hauschild. And we have a report with a recommended deferral. And Mr. Voss, you wish to speak to it?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
So in this particular case, again, I'll seek committee's approval to speak to both items 5.4 and 5.5 on the agenda, as they have concurrent applications on the subject property.
Yes, please go ahead.
So the purposes of these reports was to basically outline the two consent to sever applications D10-012 2019 and D10-013 2019, and to receive the associated public comments to date, as well as to recommend deferral of the proposed severances being requested for both lots 1 and 3 of the property at 3710 South Shore Road. The reason being is we haven't received all comments yet to ensure that we are that there's no implications in terms of changing lot lines or possessioning, or else having separate requirements or conditions placed on the severances. The applications were originally deferred at the September 4th, 2019 Committee of Adjustment meeting to allow sufficient time to obtain a wave uprush study analysis in support of the application, and that was recommended by the Conservation Authority. Without this information, it's difficult to establish the 15-meter setback from the floodplain to meet the zoning bylaw, as well as provincial policy statement requirements, and to ensure adequate building envelope on the severed properties. Initial findings would show that there could be an building envelope sufficient on one of the properties that the wave, the floodplain covers a good portion of the property. So there's a little bit more concern for that property. And since we haven't received comments, we want to ensure that there isn't special requirements being that close to the floodplain. It's also a smaller building envelope. So the applicant, Martin Hauschild, is requesting consent to sever the 2 parcels of land on South Shore Road, lots 1 and 3, as indicated on the sketches attached to the applications, with lot 2 being the retained parcel. Severed lot 1 is roughly 98.7 acres with 63 meters of frontage. Parcel lot 3 would roughly be 2 acres with 61 meters. And lot 2, which would be the remnant parcel, would be 2 acres with 64 meters of frontage. The purpose of the proposed lot severance is to create a new residential building lot that will also be also support existing farm uses. So that's for the larger parcel known as lot 1. And lot 3 is for just a smaller residential lot in the rural or shoreline residential area. So staff are recommending deferral of these applications until such time as comments are received. to ensure supportive comments are obtained and to allow the applicant time to potentially revise the application if the comments and discussions after the fact conclude that there might be a revision necessary. So the wave upper study had recently been circulated in the hopes of recommending approval at this stage at today's meeting. However, due to the short turnaround time and being near the holiday, not all the comments were received in time. Results of the wave upper analysis may require revision to the original applications, depending on the comments received. Therefore, analysis is required is not required at this time if the application has the potential to be altered. It's anticipated that the applications will be brought forward at the next committee meeting. I haven't received any comments for the applications. I did speak to one of the owners, potential purchasers of one of the properties, who intend to do some work on the lands, just to discuss kind of timelines in regards to the application, once the application is approved, and what kind of timelines after that certain things need to be conducted, and so they have an idea of how to prepare for their future plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Voss. Before I go to the public committee, do we have any questions with regard to the report? Seeing none, I will go to the audience. I see one hand up. I believe it's Ms. Phillips. And can you hear us?
Can you hear me now? It's actually, yeah, Mr. Phillips.
Mr. Phillips, I'm sorry.
No problem.
And please go ahead. You've got the floor, sir.
So I just had a quick question in regards to the CRCA comments. I'm wondering is there a limitation on the time that they're allowed to give those comments? And second question would be, if we were to divide the two severances, so the farmland, would that expedite the farmland approval process?
I'll turn to Mr. Voss for clarity on that one.
So in terms of one of the severances is dependent upon the other, because if there's a change in the lot or requirements for one that might potentially change the lot lines, we don't anticipate this. However, without the full comments, we can't really comment on it. So if that were to happen, that would mean that the other severance lot lines would be affected. So at this stage, it just seems a little premature to do that. So in my opinion, it would not be a suggested approach to separate the applications to facilitate a quicker approval. I missed the other question.
The other question was, is there a time limit on when we would anticipate comments from the Conservation Authority, or when we would hold up this process pending the comments from the Conservation Authority?
Generally speaking, comments are received on a regular basis from the Conservation Authority. Depending upon the time of year and then the amount of applications they receive, sometimes we'll get quicker or slower responses. In this particular case, the application was submitted and circulated to them about 2.5–3 weeks ago. Being the holiday, I'm sure they were just not able to provide comment in that time period. However, they did provide comments for the rest of the applications that were before us this evening.
Sir?
Mr. Phillips, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time in explaining it to me, and appreciate your patience.
Thank you. Do you have any other comments to make at this time?
No, sir.
Okay, committee, do we have any questions for Mr. Phillips?
I do.
Ms. Porter?
Oh, sorry, not for Mr. Phillips. Mr. Chair, I apologize. I have questions for Mr. Voss.
And okay, I'll if there are no further questions for Mr. Phillips, I'll let him go, and then go back to Ms. Porter for her question for Mr. Voss. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Voss. I just wanted to follow up a little bit on Mr. Phillips' question in regards to the turnaround times for consulting agencies. When we circulate applications, do we ask for a a date to have their comments back by, or do agencies have their own service standards, their own turnaround times that they try and abide to?
We ask for a date in these cases, and much of that is to make sure that we have the comments back in time to prepare the report. So typically speaking, it's a week and a half prior, a week and a half prior to the committee date, so that we have time to incorporate them into the reports.
And is there any kind of policy if a consulting agency doesn't get their comments back to us in time? I know we've had many deferrals in the past because of agencies not responding in a timely fashion. Now, I'm not saying that's the case in this particular application. As 2 to 3 weeks doesn't seem like a lot of time, for an agency to get comments back, as you say. But we have seen it in the past, and I'm wondering if we have any kind of policy in place where we can proceed with the applications should a consulting agency not get back to us on time.
Mr. Ross?
I'm not aware of anything offhand. I might defer to Andrea if she has any background on it.
Ms. Furness, are you able to provide?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. No, there's no set policy on that. I mean, it would generally be at our discretion and depending on what the comments are that we're looking for. So in the case of the Conservation Authority being an agency, if it's an application that's specifically dependent on floodplain measures and support that way, we would not want to proceed in advance without getting their comments because they're applicable law, and if they require a Conservation Authority permit in order to build, then there would be no point doing the severance if in the end they wouldn't be able to get a permit, for example. In regards to some other agencies, then we would have the discretion to proceed anyways if we don't get comments, if we don't deem that those comments are necessarily important or as applicable to the application. But if it is one that would have a big impact, then we wouldn't be able to do a recommendation without them. So we just try our best to work with them and get comments in a timely fashion. And in regards to this particular case, we are working with them this week to try to advance this for the February meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Furness. And just for clarity, it is the intent to bring this back for the February 1st meeting, assuming that all the pieces line up. Thank you. Any further questions, Ms. Porter?
No, thank you very much.
Anyone else on the committee? Seeing none, again, we have the two, item 5.4 and 5.5, that are inexplicably tied together, but I will ask for the motions to be separate. In both cases, the recommendation is for deferral. And do I have a motion?
I'll move to defer.
I'll take Ms. Porter and Mr. Townend as seconder. Thank you. Any comments? And then I'll call
No.
the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And any opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried for deferral. And we go to 5.5 with the same report. On the right numbers? Yep, sorry, just been double checking I'm on the right numbers. And again, the recommendation is for deferral. Can I have a motion for that? And I'll go with Mr. Buderick and Ms. Parks. Any comments? And then I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Ms. Porter. Any opposed? Motion is carried for deferral. Thank you very much. And we move to item 5.6, which is a severance for Hagedorn Road. And we have a report before us. Mr. Voss?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I'm going to ask the committee if it's okay to speak to both items 5.6 and 5.7, because they are, again, a consent for severance and a minor variance that are interconnected.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So the purpose of this these reports is to outline the consent to sever applications D10007 2020, as well as D13016 2020. That is the minor variance application. And we're going to ask for a recommendation for approval of these, both the severance and the minor variance. The property is located at the south side of Hagedorn Road, just west of 84 Hagedorn Road. The applicant is requesting to sever a 0.6 hectare parcel of land, leaving a remnant parcel of 14.9 hectares. The result of an approved severance would leave the retained parcel deficient on road frontage by 15 meters. The purpose of the lot severance is to create a new residential building lot. And if approved, the applicants have indicated that they wish to build as well on the remaining remnant lots. The applicant has submitted a concurrent minor variance application to request the relief for the road frontage from the zoning bylaw, road frontage requirement from the zoning bylaw. The sketch for the applications highlights the proposed severed parcel on the west side of the vacant lot, fronting onto the south side of Hagedorn Road. The lot was appropriately sized to avoid the watercourse and large unevaluated wetland identified on the subject property. And that was done in conversations with the Conservation Authority. The proposed consent required an aggregate study to be provided in support of the application, as the subject fell in the aggregate reserve overlay in the Schedule B of the township's official plan. In this case, a favorable aggregate study report was received, so it allowed us to move forward with the severance application. The applicant also submitted a stage 1 and 2 archaeological assessment that focused on the severed lot. The resulting report was returned and indicated that there was no heritage interests to protect on the site. So staff, looking at the various policies, looked at the Planning Act to see if it was in the public interest and conformed to the official plan, whether it was suitable of the land for the purposes of which it is being divided, as well as that the dimensions and shapes of the proposed lots were satisfactory. The proposal appears to maintain the rural character of the area, and the resulting lots are considered to be of an appropriate shape and size. Even with the reduced frontage of the proposed lots, they still allow for different activities, and the retained lot is large enough to allow for the different activities that are allowed, uses that are allowed on the property. The CRCA has reviewed the proposal and has indicated there are sufficient areas outside of the environmentally sensitive areas identified on the property, such as significant woodlands and natural made, and as well they looked at the hazard areas in terms of the waterways and unevaluated wetland, and concluded that the development can occur outside of those areas on both the retained and the severed parcels. So the township staff are of the opinion, therefore, that the proposal represents an efficient use of available land resources and is not anticipated to be at odds with the public interest, thereby satisfying the Planning Act considerations. In terms of the provincial policy statement, we looked at whether it was an appropriate land use pattern, whether the proposal conforms with the permitted uses in the rural areas, whether the proposal conflicts with the provincial policy statement policies, and whether the proposal can be sustained by rural service levels. The proposal does not appear to detract from recognized residential uses on the subject property and the neighboring non-residential uses. No barns were in the vicinity that would have required a minimum distance separation calculation. The resulting lots are considered satisfactory in shape and size to maintain the rural character of the area, providing sufficient space between the different houses and development on both the severed and retained lands, and also provide access to the back of the lands for the recognized non-residential activities. The proposal is also not anticipated to impact rural service delivery in any way. The RCA staff concluded that there was sufficient area away from the identified watercourse and unevaluated wetlands on the property. The applicants have provided the mineral aggregate land use compatibility report with the application. Generally, the study concluded that the conflicting uses were adequately considered and that the proposal would result in no further hindrance to future extraction in nearby areas. than what would be expected considering the existing and permitted development at this location. As mentioned, there are no heritage features on the severed lot to consider as confirmed in the archaeological assessment. For the reasons above, staff are of the opinion that the proposal meets the provincial policy statements considerations. We also looked at the official plan. The county official plan designates the lands as rural area. The township official plan designates the subject lands as rural, environmentally sensitive, and it's also in an aggregate reserve. The area shape and of the lots, as discussed, where it seemed to be away from the woodlands and wetlands, and the rural, and in looking at the rural policies, so that deals with more of the environmentally, making sure the environmentally sensitive features are being addressed. In terms of the rural policies, speak to the minimum road frontage, which is a 150-meter requirement, and that's why the applicant is asking for concurrent minor variance to reduce the retained land road frontage from 150 meters to 135 meters in order to address that requirement. Therefore, a condition is being recommended on the approval of the severance application, subject to the minor variance application approval as well. To address the environmentally sensitive features, CRCA was contacted. CRCA staff identified the unevaluated wetland and water course on the property early enough so that the applicant could revise the application sketch to move the boundaries away from these features. So it's been purposely moved to keep away from those features and keep all of those sensitive features on one property, which was more to the CRCA's satisfaction. The subject property falls in the aggregate reserve overlay. The official plan allows the reduction of an influence area so long as an appropriate study showing the compatibility can be achieved between potentially conflicting uses. The applicants provided the favorable report, and therefore staff can support a reduction in the influence area for the lots in question. Staff are of the opinion that the applicant has produced the necessary approvals in advance of the application, as well as seeking approval of concurrent minor variance to address any official plan concerns and consider the official plan matters satisfied. While both the proposed severed and retained lots meet current zoning requirements for minimum lot area, the owner has the minor variance for the to address the shortage of frontage by 15 meters. It is recognized that there are natural constraints of the lot to allow for agricultural activities owing to the position and size of the large wetland on the property. Otherwise, the proposal conforms to the existing bylaw requirements. The reduced road frontage would still allow for other recognized non-residential uses. So we're just asking that the approval be based on the approval of the minor variance for the reduced road frontage, which we feel is minor in nature and within keeping of other requests for that nature in the township. Staff received one phone call from a neighbor across the street who wanted to confirm the intent of the severance and associated activities, and the caller seemed satisfied with the call. They just wanted to make sure their boundaries weren't being affected. They also had, there were no other comments received from the members of the public. Therefore, staff are recommending approval of both applications, subject to the standard conditions for legal registration, creation of a survey, parkland and lieu fee, establishment of suitable well, enter a development agreement for grading plan. And we've also added conditions on both the minor variance and the severance applications to require that they only be allowed if the other is approved. So, so we're recommending approval in this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Voss. Committee, do we have any questions with regard to this report? Mr. Hagedorn.
Thank you. I just have a few questions. I'll just go through them if I can.
Please.
Here. I just wanted to confirm, when I was reading the report, am I understanding it correctly that condition 7 is being deleted and there's 3 other conditions on page, what was it, 7 or 8 of the report that was being interjected instead? And I'm not seeing them right
I'm not aware of any deletions. Andrea, do you know of any?
Ms. Furness?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Note the 5.6 is the severance application. So there's 10 conditions. 9 of the conditions are the typical standard ones. And then the one additional condition is that the minor variance application be in effect.
Okay, I must have misread it then. Or maybe I'm looking at the, yeah, there it is on page 16 of 94. It lists 3 other conditions there and I misunderstood that then. I thought that was being included as part of the conditions. So that it covered both the severed and retained property and not just the single.
I think what might be happening is that in this case, there's already an active building application on the subject property where the actual house that's being built is on the proposed severed lot and has been examined in terms of zoning compliance with a future approved lot. So because it's a lot of record, they can ask for a building permit, and they have been provided a building permit. So that build has been allowed to move forward. So therefore, the development agreement is no longer required on the severed part of the parcel, only the retained part.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Eichenhorn?
So those conditions have already been met on the severed portion then, is what I understand. Okay.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, I misread that then. Glad I clarified it. This application indicates that it's only on the south side of the road. The original property was on both sides of the road. Was the northern portion already severed? I don't remember it coming through the committee, so I wasn't sure what the status of that was.
So when there is a road that passes between a property, it's considered a natural severance. So this is not something that would come to committee. This is merely something that is done with legal representation. So you'd have a lawyer go in and register the parcels separately. So even though it might have been registered that both parcels were all one property at one time, the applicant can go in with their lawyer and have them separately deemed separate parcels.
And so in that process, just so I can understand it, in that process, there's no public meeting or no notifications then?
That's correct. In fact, the township receives notification from the registry office that a transfer of ownership has occurred.
Okay.
Mhm.
I thought it had to be severed. Okay.
And just for committee's knowledge, it's not considered, because it's considered a natural severance, it's not considered a severance that can be used as, so our official plan currently states that you can only have 2 severances off of property since 1986 on the mainland in the Ernestown the old Ernestown Township. So so this would not apply as a severance, just for committee's knowledge.
And so just so I can understand, the township doesn't have, did we have an option to put conditions on that then, like for the additional road allowance or drainage or anything? And I'm only concerned because there's a flooding area there.
This one does have the road allowance widening. associated with it. On the northern side, no, we did not have the opportunity to do that. It's only when they apply for a severance, and it's not a natural severance, if that makes any sense.
Okay. Okay, that's the first time I'd heard of that. So just another question, Mr. Chair, if I may. In this case on the south side, then just dealing with the south side, there were a couple of wells drilled and one is quite close to the road. Is there any, does the township ever put anything on title or anything about liability for wells, new wells like that, that are so, because with the widening, it's going to be close. And I know other road authorities do that sometimes where there's potential for in the future, someone to come back with future contamination and of course, bring in the deeper pockets into any litigation.
Mr. Voss or Mr. Furness?
I believe there's some restrictions as to how far a well has to be from a property line in a roadway. However, the well report and so forth hasn't been, in order to establish a severance, they have to produce the well report after the severance occurs. So in this case, they've drilled a well, but they haven't really gotten the approvals for it. To my knowledge, now I might be speaking out of turn here, but I can't really answer further on that. I'm just not in my realm there.
And it might be during the land use and building permit stage that happens as well. I just wasn't sure if this was a stage or not. So I wanted to ask the question before it was too late to ask the question. Okay, and the drainage concerns that were raised, I guess if there's no conditions on the north side, the drainage concerns are going to exist then. Okay. Okay. And one other, during the presentation, you kept referring to the severed portion, had the archaeological study done on it. Did that archaeological study cover the retained as well, where the future development will be there? Or is it only on the one lot?
It was focused on the severed parcel. However, they did make comments about how the future development in that area, the retained lands, I forget precisely how it was worded, but they did indicate that there might be interest in that area.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other committee members have questions with regards to this report? Seeing none, I go to the audience. I don't think there's anyone in the audience to speak to this, but we do have one member left. And if you're interested in speaking, use the raise hand signal. And with that, I would say no. Right. Okay. So again, we have two reports, one for a severance, one for a minor variance that are tied together. I will look for a motion on 5.6, the severance first. Members of the committee, would you like to make a motion?
I'll move to receive and adopt the recommendations.
Thank you, Ms. Porter. And do I have a seconder? Mr. Townend? Right. Any comments?
No.
No. Anyone else? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any
Yay.
opposed? Motion is carried. And we move to item 5.7, which is the Haggardorn Road minor variance. Again, I look for a mover. Mr. Buderick, seconded by Mr. Townend. Thank you. Any comments, Mr. Buderick or Mr. Townend? Anyone else? I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Yay.
And opposed? And motion is carried. Okay. So both are approved. Next on the agenda, item 6, upcoming meeting dates. We are projecting a meeting for February the 1st. That again will be this Zoom electronic meeting. That's unless there's something else from the committee. I thank all of you for attending tonight. I hope you all had a great new year, and I look forward to seeing you in upcoming meetings. Can I get a motion for adjournment? Mr. Buderick, seconded by Mr. Gordon. And call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all. Have a great evening. Enjoy the
Good
game.
night, everybody.
All right.